Hey, Jamie. How are things?
Hello, Robin. Great to see you.
Good to see you again. Exciting times for you. Your book just came out.
The book just came out, and I must admit, after last week, the whirlwind of activities left me on Saturday morning absolutely exhausted. So I'm just sort of putting the pieces back together now.
But fascinating times. So you have a book, Visionaries, Rebels and Machines, that just came out. It explores the fascinating journey through technological evolution. First of all, what actually inspired you to write this book? And what do you hope readers will take away from it?
I think that's a bit of a multifaceted question. The story was lingering in my mind for forever. I'm a computer programmer by training, and I knew somewhere in the depths of my subconsciousness that there was a thing called the transistor, and the transistor is used inside of microchips. But as a software person, we tend not to look at the hardware. And I was thinking, look, I'd love to tell that story because I knew that the PC came from Xerox PARC, and I knew about the arrival of the internet and then the web. So that was the sort of the whole story, if you like. But then as I started to put the book together, it occurred to me that in many ways, humanistic management sits in the background of technology's foreground. And I started to think, maybe our customers, the people I work with, managers and executives, would be able to take something from this story of the teams that built technology. So that was roughly the story. And then the inspiration really came to me when I was, working with my customers. But quite unbelievably, this story is going to depress you, Robin. About a year ago, no, it was more like 18 months ago, I was in the middle of, the let's call it the beginning of the end of the book. And the team at DevOps London, which is a meetup, had asked me to come and speak to them. No problem, I said. I was right in the middle of editing chapter 10, and I couldn't speak about Amazon unless I could speak about the web and Moore's Law and all of that. So I did the speech. It went down really well, and I had a queue of people, young people. I still think I'm young, but I'm actually nearly 50. And they said to me, that was great. We don't know anything about history. Can you tell us a little bit more? Yeah, no problem, I said. And I started to, get prepared to talk about time sharing and the rise, the sort of rise of time sharing in the 1970s. And then they said, no, 1 second, that's not what we meant. We're talking about the 1990s. And that's when I realized that these young people are not getting the sort of historical education that we might have had. And so in a way, I tailored the book and tweaked the book for, intelligent, curious, and in some cases, newly graduated computer people.
That was the spark, or one of many sparks that inspired the book. But let's talk about your career before we dive a bit deeper into that. You've had quite an incredible career already, from founding Container Solutions to basically witnessing quite a few pivotal shifts in technology so far. Connectivity, internet, move to the cloud, mobile, and now, of course, everything revolves around AI. The journey that you've had, how did it shape the stories and themes in your new book?
I've had an incredible journey. I feel very privileged to have done what I was able to do, and I continue on that path, as it were, right now. For me, I actually think the spark for this story started when I was working with KLM in the Netherlands. And it was right back in the middle of the noughties where airlines were coming online in exactly the same way that Amazon had brought a bookstore online, and Netflix were, right in the middle of bringing a video store online. So we were disrupting the high street. I'd been a computer programmer at university, and I'd pottered with computers ever since I was about 10 years old, actually. And I enjoyed it. But all of a sudden, I found myself in the strange position of looking after other people, guiding the team. Nobody told me I'd taken a step into management, but that's exactly what had happened. And I was like, well, how do I get the best out of my people? How do I delegate tasks? And I picked up a book right in Schiphol Rijk in the offices of KLM, and it was Maslow management. And on the very first page, it says, the management of workers is way more effective than individual therapy. So done properly, the management of work could be a utopian technique. And I was like, what the actual? Seriously, what the actual? So all of a sudden, because I'm not a politician and I'm not a social reformer, but I wanted to sort of do something good in the world. This was the beginning of Container Solutions in my mind, because on that project, we were using extreme programming, but we had to extend it to deal with the fact that we had web scale infrastructure, potentially hundreds of thousands of users. So you've got complex systems on the one hand, Maslow management on the other, and me racking my brains on how best to lead. And let's be honest, computer programmers and software engineers, they're not the easiest people to manage. So how do we manage this for the good of the company, the good of our careers, and then maybe the good of society? And in a way, Maslow plus extreme programming in the era of cloud became container solutions. And in a way, that's what I've just written up in the book.
This is something that I really, really appreciate about the book. It takes lessons from the past, and you go way back, to electrification up until cloud transformation. Is there anything in particular from the past that you think leaders today should understand to be able to harness the power of also emerging technologies like AI, quantum computing, and whatnot?
I think, yeah. Well, the short answer to that question is absolutely yes. What I really discovered, I must have understood it subconsciously when I started, but once I started piecing the book together, I realized that from Edison right the way through Los Alamos, where Robert Oppenheimer, brought the atomic bomb to life, technologies change, but human nature doesn't. So the way that Thomas Edison managed his team of cross-functional engineers and experimentalists is really hardly any different to how I manage my teams at Container Solutions. So when you have people who are drawn to technical work that essentially use the technologies of yesterday to invent the technologies of tomorrow, those techniques hold. You need to create a safe space. You need to be respectful. Very importantly, you need to remove things out of the way. So the management of technical workers is not about adding things. It's not about adding Friday drinks or adding an extra catch-up. It's about moving things out the way so they can get into psychological flow, which is when they get the most productive and the most creative. So really, what I kind of figured out was you can't talk about cloud unless you talk about it in its historical context. But by doing that, we learned a really valuable lesson. Technologies change, but people and human nature doesn't. So I think around about chapter 14, we finally make it back to the 2000s. And a number of managers had said to me, that chapter was absolutely brilliant, because that's the chapter I talk about leadership at Netflix, talent at Netflix. I share some stories of Container Solutions. And finally, boom, the manager who's reading that book gets it. Now I understand why all of these things were used at Netflix and how they can be used in my own organization as we move forward.
Lessons, of course, sometimes create a sense of this is what I need to do. Sometimes lessons also mean avoiding mistakes, avoiding pitfalls that have been made in the past. Throughout your journey at Container Solutions, have you learned anything from the past that you were able to use in your day-to-day activities as a manager, as a business leader, to help you avoid these mistakes that have been made in the past?
One of my biggest fears is that I won't get a chance to apply the lessons I learned at Container Solutions. I think the truth is, it's an interesting question. What is a leader? It's a very, very difficult question. If you look on Amazon and look for books on leadership, they are almost endless. And every year a new book comes out. I think fundamentally, why do some people extract wisdom from their experiences while others don't? And I think a leader is somebody who learns their lessons and applies them reasonably quickly into an evolving situation. So what I can tell you is what I learned at KLM became the foundation of what we did at Container Solutions. And then in the first couple of years at Container Solutions, those were the foundations. The mistakes we made were the foundations for what would come next. So for me, I suppose the biggest one with Container Solutions was as I stepped into an entrepreneurial role, really properly for the first time in my life, you start to deal with different types of people. So I'm used to dealing with techies. We're all kind of progressive, quite easygoing, conflict avoidant. But actually the world, in the procurement offices of our customers, investors, for example, people have a very different worldview and a very different approach to things. So certainly I lost a piece of my soul in dealing with that part of the world because I'd never dealt with that before. And one of the things I enjoy doing now is helping startups and scale-ups to sort of avoid the mistakes that we made back then. Right. And I think the biggest one is don't bother with managers until you're about 100 people big. I think we tried to scale Container Solutions too early. Our marketing team got too big, our exec team got too big. And if I could go back in time, I would say to myself and the other founder, do you know what? Let's try to keep this small. That feels like a classic mistake, but yet we walked into it. So that's my general advice is get your foundations right and don't worry about managers, professional managers especially, because they're not usually that good at managing, and until you get to a certain scale. And I think we went a little bit too early.
That's a good lesson learned. So let's talk about artificial intelligence, the topic that we cannot avoid. There is a lot of noise out there. There is some signal. But when you were researching your book or for your book, what were some of the most exciting or unexpected insights about AI's potential to reshape business and society as a whole? And how can companies actually distinguish between all the hype that we're seeing and the real opportunity that's out there?
I think they distinguish between the hype and the real opportunity with great difficulty. There is so much noise right now, it's remarkable. So I would start at this point. First of all, forget AI as a catch-all term. There is no such thing as AI, as some sort of blanket statement. There are basically forecasting artificial intelligence systems. They are the things that extract patterns of the past and project them into the future. Now, when that's a movie recommendation on Netflix, yeah, great. That's nobody's really going to get hurt if Netflix recommends a movie you don't quite like. However, if you're to sort of look at who've succeeded in a business in the past, which could be narcissistic men, for example, and then say, well, those people have succeeded in the past, maybe they'll succeed in the future. So if you have an artificial, forecasting AI system that extrapolates patterns from the past, it will also extrapolate injustices from the past and project them into the future. This is a terrible, terrible state of affairs. So that's one type of AI system. The other type of AI system is generative artificial intelligence. The tokenizers, the statistical parrots, these machines trick us. They trick us as early as 1973. A fellow invented a program called ELIZA, and it asked basic questions. How are you today? And if you said to ELIZA, oh, I'm feeling a bit sad, it would say, oh, tell me more about that. This was the simplest type of if-else logic you could imagine. And people thought ELIZA was alive. Now, obviously, we have now got 50 more years of experience behind us. So therefore, ChatGPT and tools like it look remarkably sentient, because as humans, behind words, there is always a mind. There are no minds behind generative AI. So that is just a fact. There's only two really type of practical systems. One of them's scary when you apply it to the lives of humans. And the other one is scary because it's very plausible, but it makes mistakes. But they're not hallucinations. They're literally designed to be plausible. So if it made obvious mistakes, it'd be like, great, generative AI is a great assistant. It's like a junior person. That's patently a mistake. However, it makes mistakes that are hard to spot, which is why you will not be surprised to hear that the new DORA report has said that the use of Gen AI from computer programmers makes them happier, yay, because they're more productive, and makes systems more unstable because mistakes are creeping in. So that is my primary rant on the current state of AI. However, I did learn something very, very important in the book. Around about the 1930s, right in the middle of the Great Depression, a number of what you would probably call these days techno-optimistic journalists got their heads together. And they said, well, if labour remains scarce and if we have these technological breakthroughs, then the United States, for example, can look forward to 3 decades of prosperity. Now, to print that article, which is what they did, was absolutely the height of offensiveness. People were starving, people were jumping off buildings on Wall Street, and their predictions just seemed nonsensical. Well, in a way, though, all those predictions proved correct. So the techno-optimists were right, and all the economists of the day were wrong. And the lesson we need to take away from that is away from the hype, away from the boom and bust cycle of business, practitioners, researchers, business people will get busy finding genuine use cases. Eventually, they will translate to business success, economic success, and societal success. So I'm not against AI. There's a great system that's been trialed in Uganda that checks biomarkers on fetuses. This equipment is easy to use. You can train on it in 1 hour, and it's more accurate than the biggest sort of machines and the teams that run them right here in England. This is a classic use case. So I did get asked through the week, you're very negative on AI. And I was like, oh, no, sorry, you've misunderstood me. Both of these things are true. There's a load of bullshit and hype around AI from the people who are trying to sell it. Bang, that is a fact. And there are loads of practical applications, on the other hand, that are working right now. That is also a fact. And by the way, people, away from all the noise, will be finding genuine use cases for this. So I suppose that's a classic example of history teaching us something about the present.
Absolutely does. But then the question remains, would you consider yourself a techno-optimist? I would always imagine that any entrepreneur has to be a techno-optimist to be able to change things and build things. But would you consider yourself to be?
This is a terrible question because you will, by answering the question, I will bear my whole personality and soul on this videocast or podcast. I think if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say no. I'm not a techno-optimist. And the reason is even though I worked in web technologies for forever, I never actually thought they were going to work. And so when everybody was using Netflix, I was still going to the DVD store. I love browsing, and I thought the shopping experience will never make me go online. And even though I'm a computer scientist by training, and then I did a further study in computational science, I prefer to use pen and paper. So I'm not a gadget person. And I suppose my left-leaning politics has taught me that it's not individual acts that change society, it's acts of parliament. And so I'm not really a techno-optimist in the sense that I don't think technology will solve everybody's problems. I think it's a huge mistake to think that. Do I believe AI will be put to good uses? Yes, of course. Do I believe AI will be put to awful uses? Also, of course. At the turn of the last century, just before the First World War and the carnage unfolded in the fields of Flanders and France, Western society was proud of itself. They said, we are so rational, we've become so liberal in our economic policies, and because of industrialization, we can now kill on such a large scale, it would be so horrific, nobody would ever do it. 1 year later, we'd applied industrialization to massacre each other in droves. So the idea that technology will not be put to the use of warfare is absolutely ludicrous. It would buck the trend of the whole of humanity's history. That being said, the idea that it won't be put to good use would also buck the trend of the whole of human history. So I think I'm healthily ambivalent about what's coming next. But technology will not solve all our problems. It's not that easy.
Very interesting take. But then the question remains, what can companies actually do? Because AI is creeping into society and business at a speed and scale which we've never seen before. How can these teams, and these are ranging from big companies to very small SMEs, how can they successfully adopt AI in their culture, in their organization? And how can they create an environment of experimentation and learning that you would need to successfully adopt AI?
Well, the answer is with great difficulty. I do address this in chapter 17 of the book. What can you do? The real question behind the question is, how do you prepare for a future that you cannot predict? And the classic way we explain this is to divide the future up into 3 different types of moves. So if the future is reasonably well known, so for example, we know that your own data as a business trained on an LLM might help you streamline your HR processes, so you can go into a chatbot and say, how many holidays have I got left? And the damn thing will tell you. And that's because it's trained on your policies. So we know that clean data that's used to train LLMs might be useful for us in the future. Even, that's reasonably easy to predict. So if the future is reasonably easy to predict, you should be looking at no regret moves, things that you should do. And no matter what the future brings, you're not going to regret it. So surely, experimenting with Copilot, some people right now are claiming they don't work, but I think experimenting with Copilot seems like a reasonably no regret move. And yes, they seem to make plausible mistakes that are hard to spot. Also, then maybe we should experiment with Copilots at a different type of testing to bring the two together. Now, if the future is rather, is a bit less known, then you can think about experiments. So you can sort of cultivate a different range of options. So for example, across from my office in London, there is an Aldi. It's completely, allegedly, it's artificially intelligent. Now, the question is, do those cameras really connect to computers, or do they connect to low-paid workers in a different part of the world that monitor the screens? I don't know the answer to that question. However, this Aldi supermarket has clearly cost them some money. Let's say it's cost them £5 million. But if it works, then they can scale that across the rest of their landscape here in the United Kingdom. So an experiment is usually about buying the right to play in the future. So I think that's a good example. Another example comes from Intel. This is a fantastic lesson from history. Intel's main business was memory. They were geared up for memory, multi-billion dollar operations. Gordon Moore lived memory. Robert Noyce lived memory. It was easy to organize on silicon, rows and rows of transistors. Great. But slowly but surely, Japanese memory was getting better and better and better. Now, luckily for Intel, they had in the background a microprocessor team. It was underfunded, neglected, but they were doing enough each year trying to sell the microprocessor, trying to develop it. They were doing enough each year that it became a viable option for the future. And when Intel realized, we're done, we're dead in memory. If we fight the memory battle against the Japanese, it will be the last battle we fight. So all of a sudden, Andy Grove could load the whole of Intel into the lifeboat of microprocessors. And of course, as they say, the rest is history. So you need to cultivate options by building capabilities and by having experiments running. And of course, the third thing you can do to prepare for a future you can't predict is research. Now, research is an expensive game. Historically, so Xerox, the photocopying company, they invented the personal computer. They really, really did. They took all the best people from ARPA who had started to sort of build the PC, at least in their imaginations. They took all of the team from ARPA, continued the research that the DoD had done, and invented the PC. But by the time Xerox brought it to market, Apple had beat them to the punch. And besides, with Reaganomics and the depression of the early 1980s, nobody wanted to pay for Xerox's £50,000 networked PC when they could buy an Apple II. So that was a great example where Xerox thought they saw the future. It's an electronic office. They bet massively on it. And to be fair, they could afford to because Xerox were a hyper-successful company. But then they got it out too late. Now, you see this occurring right now. Google bought DeepMind. So instead of setting up their own research capability, they bought one. Microsoft, of course, invested in OpenAI. So I guess in summary, step one, what are the moves you can make that will give you no regrets? Step two, what are the slightly more expensive experiments you can run that give you the right to play in the future? And step three, if you've got the backbone and the dollars to do it, you should invest in R&D. But I do always point out to people, Amazon invented the cloud with simple stepwise changes. Oh, first we try payments, then we do compute. Oh, then we put a web interface on it. And remarkably, they created the cloud as we know it and held a monopoly position for 7 years. So you don't need R&D all the time. Stepwise moves a la Amazon in the noughties will get you quite far.
Good insights. And for all of these 3 points, I would argue that talent, skills is at the heart of it. You cannot really prepare very well for a future that nobody can predict in the uncertain world that we live in. But at the same time, you need to think about, as an organization, how am I going to recruit, retain, upskill, reskill the people on my team that are going to have to build the solutions for tomorrow's customers, right? So what are the expertise areas that will be crucial in the coming years, and how can these talent gaps be overcome?
Well, it's funny you should say that because I mentioned earlier the chapter that all the managers are raving about, and I've now been told you've got to write a full book based on chapter 14. I literally addressed that in chapter 14 of the book. It's now been called the Dobson algorithm. This is it's not my algorithm. I've basically extracted it from history and my own experience at Container Solutions. The most important thing, so if people really want to know the algorithm, they can read the book. Alternatively, I'm going to explain now. First of all, what does your business need? This is not just about hard skills. So yes, data science, cloud computing, decent programmers, these people, you'll always need them. But it's the soft skills. It's the people who are flexible, can deal with information or lack of information. They can deal with ambiguity. So one of the things we did at Container Solutions is we use psychometric tests to find the right type of people that suits our company. And our company specializes in innovation, cloud computing, and a little bit of artificial intelligence right now. So we need open-minded, experimental people who are not afraid to fail. So it's the soft skills that matter. Now, the problem with this is if you're a manager, you need to understand the type of work you're doing. So you have to have a technically savvy manager. If the technically savvy manager understands, well, the type of people who will excel in this place are the people who can deal with ambiguity. Well, that's something that you value as a business. We value those who can deal with ambiguity. We value flexibility. So boom, that is the start of the Dobson algorithm. What are the values of your company? And it's not just about you as a founder, and nobody cares about the values of the founder. What values do you need in order to carry out this work? So step one, what do you value? Step two, translate them into hiring policies and promotional policies. And step three, if you've got the backbone, bring in procedures that help you remove people who don't share those values. And I know, Robin, to your European ears and to my European ears, this sounds absolutely terrible, but Netflix have got something called the Keepers Test. And it's very simple. They ask their managers, they say, tell me about this guy, Robin. If he was to leave, would you fight for him? And if the manager's answer to the question is no, I wouldn't fight for them, the advice is, well, give them a redundancy package and get rid of them. And that sounds brutal, but that is how they keep a concentration of the right type of people to run what is essentially a pretty complicated and right now successful business.
When you talk to Container Solutions clients, CEOs, business leaders, maybe startup and scale-ups, operators and founders, what do you reckon the most common misconceptions about AI and the future that we're heading towards are?
It's the same misconception they had about the cloud, the same misconception they had about the web, the same misconception they had about object-oriented programming before that. People like me, exactly like senior executives and the customers we help, are drawn to computers because they prefer to work with computers than with other people. So the misconception is it's a technical problem. It is not a technical problem. The customers that we have that are succeeding right now are the ones hiring the right type of talent in order to sort of bring the world of AI online. So that goes all the way back to Edison. Look after your techies and your techies will look after your technology. So this is still the biggest misconception that somehow this is a technical problem. It's just not. And then of course but this is a technical issue. The other issue is just pure ignorance. Pure ignorance. When I first started building web applications, the teams we worked on were full of publishers. Now, I don't want to be disrespectful to publishers, but, the web grew out of, publishing. The precursor to HTML was, I think, SGML, and it was a markup language for setting books. But by the time we were building stuff for KLM, it was a computing problem. And so back then you had like a mismatch between what the web was and these old people who would come from publishing and found themselves in this strange world. Right now we've got managers and executives who are woefully undereducated, generally undereducated. Budgets are tight, profit margins are tight. And so at the worst possible moment, they're looking for a magical solution. They've fallen prone to wishful thinking. And of course, into that space step salespeople. Hello, I've got this solution. It will work. It will reduce your headcount by 10, 50. It will give you a 3,000% increase in productivity. That's exactly what people used to say during the time of the Luddites. My new spinning jenny will give you 5,000% increase in productivity. It's what Amazon salespeople told people 15 years ago. It's as old as time. Economic times get tough and snake oil salespeople make out they've got a turnkey solution. They don't exist.
The book is now out.
The book is
Visionaries,
out.
Rebels, and Machines. Is there anything that you remember while you were reading your book, a particular story or example of tech innovation that really genuinely surprised or inspired you the most? Something that you did not know before you started doing the research and completely changed your line of thinking on?
There was one thing. So programmers are scared of electronics. I didn't realize that the transistor is basically a vacuum tube, but very small. And I didn't realize the vacuum tube was just a light bulb with a bit of wire stuck in it. That changed the way the electrons flowed around it. So I spent the last 25 years scared of researching the transistor. And I was like, oh, I should have done that earlier. So that was just more like a little bit of trivia. And I would encourage other computer programmers to either research it themselves and, of course, grab the book and read that. What was the big I think there's a big reveal in the book where I was convinced, I was genuinely convinced, and of course, I love being right. Who doesn't love being right? But I was genuinely convinced that artificial neural networks would never win at the game of Go. The very popular in parts of Asia. It's like it's more strategic than chess, but much more importantly, the permutations on the board are absolutely massive. You couldn't calculate all the permutations with a computer before the universe ended. Now, when IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, it was using a brute force algorithm. It had a human operator that was helping it a little bit, but it basically used a brute force algorithm. And once a couple of moves on the chessboard were made, the search base got smaller and smaller and smaller. So I figured, well, there's number one, we'll never have enough computing power to create an artificial neural network that's powerful enough to beat Go. And even if we did, which we won't, we'll never have enough training data. I was wrong about that. And I was convinced I'd be right until the very moment I was wrong. And I think the back propagation of errors, which was, a theoretical breakthrough in about 1983, and the fact that I think it's called reinforced learning, they got the computers to play against each other. So they generated their own data very quickly because computers are very quick. And that was enough to sort of, train that model to, beat Lee Sedol in a game of Go. So I think for me, that was a turning point, because if they can play Go, then why wouldn't they be able to write poetry? That's something else we said computers would never be able to do. And I suppose the final hugely eye-opening thing for me was around the research of two gentlemen called Locke and Latham, Gary Locke, Edwin Latham. They more or less invented something called goal-setting theory. And once I went down that rabbit hole, I never wanted to come out. And in the end, they got down to a number of simple rules. If a goal is hard enough, you keep going. If a goal is within reach, you've kept going. All of a sudden, secondary goals will vanish. You forget to cut your hair. Your personal hygiene will go out the window. So now we all of a sudden started having an explanation as to why computer programmers would focus on the job in hand rather than their personal hygiene. I certainly do that when I'm creating. I don't cut my hair, and then all of a sudden I finish a chapter or I finish what I'm working on, and the next day people say, "Oh, you've cut your hair." So this was remarkable. But then, interestingly, Locke and Latham divide us up into performance goal-oriented people and learning goal-oriented people. Most computer programmers are learning goal-oriented. And even though they don't like feedback, they can deal with it because they're trying to learn. And I'm like, what the actual F? There's a whole blueprint for goal-setting theory that explains me, that explains other people, that explains Xerox PARC, that explains who's succeeding with AI. Nobody talks about the work of Locke and Latham. Nobody. And so I was like, fuck this. I'm going to write them into the book and I'm going to bring them into the mainstream of technology. And I cannot believe these people don't share a similar standing as, for example, Amy Edmondson. And Amy Edmondson is a legend, deservedly, but I think Locke and Latham should be as well. So essentially, we're all running around as managers trying to solve goal setting, and it's already been solved.
Can you elaborate on how the book Visionaries, Rebels and Machines actually relates to your day-to-day work at Container Solutions?
Funny you should ask that. One of the things we didn't see coming when we started Container Solutions, obviously as a bunch of computer programmers and people who were interested in the cloud, was just how important leadership and management was to the success of cloud computing. So for really savvy teams, we were making progress. But as the cloud sort of crossed the chasm, crossed Geoffrey Moore's chasm, as it were, we realized in enterprises, if you didn't have managers and leaders, visionaries and rebels, who could create a safe space, then success with the cloud would never come. And so quite quickly in the sort of life of Container Solutions, we all of a sudden found ourselves, entering into the world of innovation, leadership, project management, delivery management. And so in a way, a sort of small management consulting group arose within Container Solutions. So that was really where the capability came from. And then my co-founder had written Cloud Native Transformations, which was about the patterns of success with cloud computing. But what did the executives have to read? So middle managers, techies, engineers had this great book. Well, what were the executives supposed to read? So that's why I set about writing Visionaries, Rebels and Machines. And then it gets even weirder. So we presently have cloud native transformation, boom. This is the bread and butter, the bulk of what we do. We have our leadership, management and innovation work. That's my thing. My team, does all of that. But recently, we also invented, quite by accident, something called the Continuous Compliance Framework. And this does for compliance what security scanners and test frameworks once upon a time did for testing and security. So in the sense that we shift left on security, we've now shifted left on compliance. The challenge is compliance to most people is very boring, but I've been defining it as the very last frontier in continuous delivery. And quite by accident, Container Solutions are now leading that. So we've got continuous compliance as a leg of our work, the leadership work, our Visionaries and Rebels, and of course our bread and butter, cloud native transformation, which actually I'm still really passionate about, but we've got a massive team who takes care of that at CS, and thus leaving me to deal with all the Visionaries and the Rebels and the machines that they're building.
Was there anything particularly funny or amusing that you also want to talk about, or do you not want to spoil the book?
Well, I don't want to spoil the book too much, but I think the book starts by saying that, once you scratch the surface on the history of computing, it's fun, it's sad, it's dramatic, people are murdered, as people kill themselves when they invent something and then the rights are taken away from them. Not many people know this, but Stanford was founded by Mr. and Mrs. Stanford, Leland and his wife, and they founded it next to a tall tree, literally a tall tree in the middle of nowhere. The Spanish for tall tree is Palo Alto. So Palo Alto, the city, was founded by Stanford. Stanford was a robber baron from New York, and he moved out west. He controlled the railroads, amongst many other things. And anyway, like all robber barons, including the ones that we have to put up with today, as his life, was getting to its autumn years, he wanted to leave a legacy. Now, they had one son, and I would not wish this on anybody. The Stanford son died. He passed away. He was only 15 years of age. So they had all this money. They had all this land because they'd been chased out of the city because, back then people absolutely hated people like Stanford. And they decided they will build a university for the people of California, the children of California. Remarkable. It was co-ed. It was free. So women at the turn of the last century could go to Stanford. Now, Mr. Stanford, Leland, eventually passed away, leaving it to his wife and the first dean of the school. I think he was called David Starr. At that point, they had a great humanities school and a great engineering school. It was all about, science, technology. Back then, it was about mining. How do we mine the fields of California? Brilliant schools, humanistic school, technical school. And David Starr murdered Mrs. Stanford. He killed her. And as soon as he'd killed her, he killed the humanities. And so you have this remarkable story where Stanford was built around two tall trees, the Spanish for which is Palo Alto. The Stanfords were only there because they were escaping the wrath of their fellow citizens because they were hoarding so much money. The tragic loss of their son led to them building this university because they had tons of money. And then the murder of Mrs. Stanford gave us the Stanford we have today and then cast a shadow right through the history of technology, because it wasn't long before David Packard was graduating from there. Hewlett Packard then provided oscillators to Walt Disney because he needed them for Fantasia, which was a huge movie, I think, in the 1930s. So once you scratch the surface, it's bonkers. And I'm kind of telling this story with a smile on my face, but it's a terrible story. It's a terrible story. Not only were the humanities killed, and we need the humanities to balance what we're doing, but a man killed a woman. And so you've really got to ask yourself, all these years later, the suicide rate amongst teenagers is the highest in Palo Alto than any other place in the United States.
Is it really?
So, yeah. And it's because there's an expectation you can become a millionaire and if you study hard. And so you get the feeling if the technology and the drive of such sort of people was balanced, with the humanities and a more feminine side to the education. I don't mean male, female. I just simply mean the things we associate with the feminine, which appear in both men and women, then you'd feel it would be a more balanced place. So the unbalance in Silicon Valley started right at the very beginning. And I could go on forever and ever. ARPA, everybody loves ARPA. Oh, ARPA, they invented the internet. It's the golden age of R&D, where the Department of Defense built the world for the good of humanity. Yeah, ARPA don't like to talk about Agent Orange because they also invented that and dropped it in Vietnam. And what about Xerox? They invented the PC, and then they invited Steve Jobs in and said, "Hey, have you seen our PC? Look at what we're building." He's got his notepad out. So it's bonkers. It's up and down, left and right, winners, losers. People are secretive because they don't want to get sued. Alexander Graham Bell probably stole the idea for the telephone from a man called Elisha Gray. It's absolutely bonkers. Right from the beginning, right to the middle. Marvin Minsky knew artificial neural networks were a brilliant technology, and he wrote a book to disprove them. So he kicked the research into ANNs well into the long grass of academic research, where it stayed for about 20 years. The person who invented the perceptron, the precursor to ANNs, he died a broken man, aged 43. So honestly, once you get into this stuff, and that's how I wrote the book, it's all about visionaries and rebels and all the mad stuff they did. And by softening the reader up, by telling these stories, at the right moment, bang, I just insert a few facts. This is what an exclusive OR is. This is what an ANN is. This is what a microchip does. This is what a transistor does. And so the goal of the book, I mean, the sign of a cross that I've achieved it, is to entertain people while educating them. And so far, the reviews have said, that's exactly what's happened.
Fantastic. That's a really, really good segue into my final question before we wrap up. But if you look at the world today, the title of your book is Visionaries, Rebels, and Machines. Do you think 20, 30, maybe 50 years from now, we're going to still be telling stories about people, visionaries, rebels? Or is the conversation going to shift more? What are machines capable of? How can we stop them doing harm to humanity?
You've asked, wow, that's actually, I didn't see that question coming. I don't even know how to answer that. I think, if providing the human race is still alive, so let's assume we're still alive and we've survived the next 40 years, which right now I don't think is certain. If humans are still on the planet, they'll still be speaking about other humans. I still genuinely believe artificial neural networks, how could they become conscious? They're computer programs that are trained on historical data and have statistically weighted notes that choose next tokens. Intelligence could no more emerge from an artificial neural network than they could my cup of tea. Now, that's not to say we won't find brilliant uses for these technologies. So I personally do not think genuine artificial intelligence is on the horizon. You have to remember, though, I said that the web was complete shit, and I said that an ANN or a generative AI system or something like it could never, win at a game of Go. So we have to be careful. I might be that person who says it'll never happen, and thus far in my life, I've been wrong on every occasion. So maybe you should do the opposite of what I say. If humans are alive, we'll be talking about visionaries and rebels. We won't talk about Elon Musk and Zuckerberg with those terms. Andy Grove died and gave all his money to City College. Robert Noyce hated to work with the US Department of Defense. They were humanists. They really did care about their people. And although there was a biography of Tom Wolfe in the 80s that, slated Robert Noyce a bit, for all his failures, these people were people. They cared. They would be absolutely disgusted by what's happening in the United States now. So Elon Musk and the Zuckerbergs of the world will never be recorded by history as visionaries and rebels, and not in a million years. Who will be the visionaries and rebels? One of the reasons I wrote the book was to try to showcase Robert Noyce, J.C. Licklider, Bob Taylor. These were my heroes. They still are. Where are the heroes now? Those guys put men on the moon and built the internet. What are these guys doing? Inventing Uber and Twitter? So the present cohort of so-called visionaries and rebels cannot black the boots of the people I'm writing about. So if we're still here, we're not going to be talking about them as visionaries and rebels. Fingers crossed, we'll be talking about, how how this hype was shown to be hype. And actually, we've ushered in a new age of intelligent systems. And importantly, very importantly, we've learned how to share the winnings with the rest of society. The internet is publicly funded, built by Department of Defense dollars, taxpayer dollars. It is run by the government. Everybody should get a chance to share in the prizes and the gains of all of these tech companies. So that's why I hope will happen, that the gains are shared by everybody and society becomes a better place for all of us.
It's an excellent parting thought, I would say. Reading the description and the reviews of your book would already prompt me enough to give it a read myself. Interviewing you has definitely hit me over the edge to get the book read as soon as I can. Where can people actually get the book, Jamie?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. Where can people get the book? It's available at Amazon globally, so Amazon.nl, .fr, .france, whatever. And of course, all of the bookstores. So we are in Barnes and Noble in the United States, which we're really happy about. We're here at Waterstones in the UK. Waterstones have very generously, helped us launch the book in a few of their stores. So all good bookstores. It's an audiobook as well. If you can cope with listening to me for 9 hours in my Yorkshire accent, some people say they like my accent. I'm like, oh, I am not listening to the audiobook. I refuse. So audiobook, all good bookstores, and of course, Amazon.
Fantastic. That leaves lots of options, so don't miss out, folks. Any closing thoughts before you finish?
No, that's it, Robin. It's just been brilliant to see you again. It's been brilliant to work with you on this interview, and I look forward to hearing what you think of the book when you finally finish it.
Well, that's what summer is for.
Well, we deliberately released it right now as summer reading.
Fantastic idea.
Yeah.